schools because there were no white children in school. Well, it's true. It's true. And I remember traveling with my grandparents, and as we were traveling, this is when Jim Crow was still in effect, you would stop to buy food. And they traveled in cars a lot in those times because of the segregation on trains and buses was so bad. Sometimes if you had a car, you just rather ride the car. But when you stopped to get food, you had to go to the back door. And I didn't understand why are you begging these people to take their money at the back door. You can't go inside and sit down and eat. You don't even know what they did to the food. But anyway, we survived that. So in the black movement in the 60s, so now we're in the 60s, and we're sporting our afros, some big, some little, some different colors. Somebody has told us that black is beautiful. So it's nice not to have black skin. So, but then again, I remember I had some cousins, beautiful long hair. One of them almost like white hair. But they were dark. And in those days, I was the one that you would call red, light skin. Well, I had a case of the measles, and so all my hair was gone. So when we would get into these little squabbles that kids get into, they would call me bald headed, and I would call them black. Because in those days, that's how it went. So anyway, the teachers that we had, they drilled in us. They drilled in us. You have got to study. You have got to do better. You have got to be twice as good to get just a little bit of the way. We didn't think that was fair, but we did. And in Psalm 27:13, David says, I had fainted unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Now, when we were growing up, church was what you had. Everybody went to church, and you would hear the old people saying little things and singing little church songs, and all of it was related to the segregation that we were going through. And looking back at it now, that's really how we made it through, because we had the goodness of the Lord on our side in the land of the living. I remember in 9th grade, I'm coming towards the end, so I'm just going to give you some facts. In 9th grade, I had a white teacher. She said, I asked for help with some math. And she said, I don't know why all of my little black children, they just don't understand math. I'll never forget her saying that to me. And it took a black teacher to straighten that out. I remember in 10th grade, I had a white teacher. She said, we're not going to cover the section on literature for black people because it's insignificant. I didn't have any sense. I was 15 and I was irate. So I got up and I started causing a ruckus in the classroom. She said Martin Luther King was a troublemaker. He was a communist. And she was going on and on. So I said to her, you act as though black people don't have any sense, that we don't know when we're being mistreated. She said, you need to leave my classroom and come back when you know how to act like a lady. Well, I did leave the classroom really because I was put out. I went back the next day. I had no choice. But that happened. I was also 15 when I stopped saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I was in a history class, and they were saying it, and I refused. So all the kids in the class, because I had gone in like the second or third wave of integration at Seminole High School, so I never went to prom. So I'm in this mixed classroom, they're saying the pledge and I'm not. So the children are upset, and they told the instructor he needed to make me say the pledge. Well, he put me on the spot, so he thought. He said, well, we'll just ask Miss Greenway to explain to us why she's not saying the pledge. He probably had no idea that I was going to go through it line by line and explain to him that until, as black people, all of that applied to us, I wasn't going to say it. And I didn't say it for a long time. I remember the dogs. I met a girl in college. She was from Selma, Alabama. I remember those dogs. I remember watching that on TV. And tears are running down my face because I can't understand how could someone be so mean and cruel as as to sick dogs, aggressive dogs like German shepherds, on children. And they're biting those children, they're running, they're screaming, and we're watching this on TV. In 1963, Medgar Evers was murdered for fighting for rights of black people. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech. I had no idea how important that would become for me. Also, I'm sure that a lot of us in here today remember the 16th Street Baptist Church when it was bombed, and we all cried when those 4 little girls were killed simply because their skin was black. I remember the 3 murdered boys in Mississippi. One of them was black, 2 of them were Jewish, and they died because they were fighting for the rights that our kids now snuff their nose at, turn their head, don't want to go to school, and otherwise act ugly with their pants hanging down. And that was just not done in those days. Dressed appropriately. And Martin Luther King, I want to say the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. That was part of them still trying to help come along with us. We still haven't got where we need to be. Now, with the incident with the dogs and Martin Luther King teaching people how to fight peacefully, well, he got the Nobel Peace Prize for that, for peaceful demonstration, and I know that had to be hard. The Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965, so you really do need to vote because too many people died so that we could have the right to vote. We had such people, this is at the end now, Malcolm X, he was murdered in 1965. They turned us against him. They told us bad things about him. I was an adult when I learned what he really was trying to do for black people, but he was in the 60s. The Black Panthers, they were in the 60s. A lot of these school programs they have now, because of them. But you wouldn't know that because they malign black people who try to help each other, and they talk you down, and when you don't want to learn it, you won't know it. Now, when Rosa Parks wouldn't get up that day on the bus, that was a big deal for us. So now we can sit on the bus anywhere we want to, in the back or in the front, and can't nobody make us move. And in closing, I would like to say, I know that the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted and the right of the poor, because now it started in 1950, went through the 60s, through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and now we have President Obama.
I forgot one speaker, I don't know how I did that. Come on, baby. Come on, Sister Al. Y'all give Sister Al a hand clap for bringing that she come. Come on, Sister Al.
Thank you, Pastor. The saying told me 6 minutes. So, she said, Pastor said that. Okay. Well, let me tell you my story. Everybody's experience is a little different. Beverly's was typical of a lot of my friends. But the 60s for me was the best time of my life. Amen. I don't know why. Well, I know why. I was not afraid so much of the color of a man's skin, whether he was white. I was afraid of my mother. That's what scared me most of all. Now, my dad was a really easygoing man, and I remember growing up in a little town in Booker Town. I was born in 1950, so I'm older than you, Beverly. That might be a little bit why. But I started to go downtown. I remember we would go downtown Sanford here, right down here in the 50s and the 60s. We would come down here every Saturday. My mom and dad would bring us downtown Sanford. That was our outing. My little nephew, Aki, my little sister, Charlotte, we would come down here. Helen was older and gone and married. We would come down here every Saturday, and there were a lot of black businesses down here. On Sanford Avenue, there were businesses. On First Street, Mr. Dr. Stapler had a store, a grocery store, a drugstore on Sanford Avenue, and then he had one on First Street. We would come down here, we would go to the bakery. It didn't matter what color the business was. We just went in there, and they all knew my mother, and they knew my dad. My dad would hang out, and I don't know whether you guys are any of you are old out in there. My dad worked for the railroad for 46 years, so he provided a good living for us. So I had a good time growing up in the 50s and 60s. My dad bought me my first record player when I was about 12 or 13, and I played the Supremes and the Beatles and the Temptations. I just danced to all of that stuff. I was scared to do anything wrong because my mom would get on me. She was so tough, but when I graduated from high school in 1967. I had just turned 17. And unlike Beverly, I had never had the experience of going to school with white kids. All of the kids that I ever went to school with were black kids. All the kids' schools were segregated, and all my teachers were black. And it didn't really bother me because I didn't know any better, did we, Lillian? No, we didn't know better. So when they gave us a choice of going to Seminole High School in 1965 or 66, Lillian, we decided to stay at Crooms, didn't we? We didn't want to go. We didn't want to go, but some of the kids went. And they gave them hell, I heard, over there. We stayed at Crooms and we did our floats and we had a wonderful time. Now, when I graduated in 1967 in June, I begged my mom and dad to let me go to California because that's where my brother was, and he was retired. He was in the Air Force. And I went to California on the train. And I remember looking back at my mom and dad leaving Sanford and all the good memories, because they had a theater down here. My dad would take me and my best friend to every Saturday. We would go to the theater. Now the white kids sat at the top, and we sat at the bottom. And we would buy hot dogs, and they had the best hot dogs, didn't they, Lil? Best hot dogs. And we'd go down there to the movies on Saturdays, and Daddy would pick us up and bring us home, and he taught me to drive. I mean, I had the best daddy in the whole world. My mother was too, but he was just a sweetheart. So I left. It broke my parents' heart for me to leave and go to California, but it was a totally different picture. Because you know, like Beverly said, the 60s were really an unrestful time. That was the saddest thing that happened was the death of Martin Luther King and the Kennedys to me. And then the Vietnam War was going on. But I was in California. I was partying upside. I was dressing like a hippie.
What you say?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right.
I was acting like a hippie. The only thing I didn't do was smoke dope because I was scared. But I was scared of something. I just didn't want to smoke no dope. I didn't need no dope to get happy and happy one time. So I just partied. I went to college out there, and all the kids were Black Power, and they had the Black Student Union, and they were just, oh, the revolution is coming. That was their favorite word. Oh, the revolution is coming. I don't know if it ever came, but I know. They were talking about Jesus, black people ought not to be believing in Jesus. I do better than not to believe in Jesus, but my mother would kill me. And so I didn't go there either. But talking about dressing like a hippie and doing all the dances and the music and being wild looking, my mother thought, you look like heck when I came home. She says, why don't you comb your hair and put on some decent clothes and some shoes? But I didn't believe in shoes. I didn't believe in wearing regular clothes, and my hair was scraggly, and it was just a mess. But I was the happiest thing. I was happier than a dead pig in the sunshine. The 60s were just fun. I mean, they were fun. Even with all the unrest going on, I still had a good time. The time started for me in the 70s, really, the rough time when I got out of college and started to find a job and had to live on my own and all of that. But the 60s, hey, I wish somebody would strike up a song in here. I love the Beatles, the Temptations, the Mick Jagger. I love anybody that had some good music going. I was into it. So for me, Pastor, I cannot say the 60s were a bad time, even though I guess I was a spoiled little girl and it just happened. I don't know, but I don't know what it was. Or maybe it was just my mindset, or just wanted to be different, but I had a good time.